Hello and welcome to Collapse Club, where we talk about how we are to live in the time of collapse. I'm David Baum in Seattle. With me today is Nonty Sedibe. Hello, Nonty.
Hi, David. Thank you for inviting me.
Very nice to see you. Could you tell us where you are, please, and how are things there?
I'm in Spain right now, just in a town just outside of Barcelona. And I don't know, it's a beautiful, almost spring. Yeah, it's in the evening now, but we have sunny days. This is one of the things I love about Barcelona. You just have sun almost around the year. And everything is good, actually. Everything is good with its challenges, but everything is good. Thank you.
Sweet. Well, we are here today to talk about Ubuntu, which I believe forms the center of your work. And if I understand correctly, you are on a mission. You have a mission that you have set out to do. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah. I believe I want to say I believe that strongly my mission in life, or what in the East they call the Tao, is what calls me is to really create spaces where as a people we can remember our humanity, and as a people we can remember to put the earth in the center of everything that we do, and find spaces where we reconnect with each other from that basis, the essence basis of who we really are, not what we've been told and socialized to believe we are. And yeah, this is a mission that takes me in different directions of learning, learning and teaching. So it never really ends. It's a constant research, unlearning, teaching. Yeah.
And what is the meaning of Ubuntu, please?
Ubuntu is a word from South Africa. I'm from South Africa. I was born and raised in South Africa. And we have a philosophy of Ubuntu. We call it Ubuntu. For me, it is something very indigenous, and I believe it applies to all cultures, indigenous cultures. I mean, we are all indigenous in some way. We just forgot, right? The distant, some of us, especially European culture, has been separated from the indigenous ways for so long that we don't remember. But we all have our own indigenous connection. And the only difference is that in South Africa, we have a name for it, and we call it Ubuntu. And it comes from the word umuntu. Umuntu means a person or a human being. Therefore, how a person is supposed to be or behave in connection with the earth, your community, and other human beings, it's called Ubuntu. And in summary, usually people will summarize it and say, it means I am because we are. I see you. I know that I'm human because I'm having a validation from you, another human being. However, it's much broader than that because it includes your behavior towards everything, your connection to the earth, your connection to the other beings, four-legged beings, your connection to spirit, your connection to your fellow humans, and how you move within the community.
How has your experience been bringing this idea, this concept, this way of being to European culture?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because it has gone through different phases. There is a phase of enriching, I would say, not only enriching, that it's enriching to the European community when I teach about Ubuntu, because it helps the European community to remember that they are connected to something larger than themselves, that they also have indigenous history, that they can go back and find it. And it's enriching to me when I see that through this work, I'm able to touch people's hearts and minds and offer a space of healing, a space of reconciliation, a space of just reconnecting with what is essential. And in another level, it's challenging because even though Ubuntu is really about the connection with our ancestors, with the land, with remembering to live with the land again, and it's very much spiritual, there's also the consensus reality that we live in, that Ubuntu needs to be applied, right? If you're going to create a community, the community needs to have ways of governance. The community needs to have an economic system. There needs to be ways of knowing how to facilitate conflicts, because wherever there's people, there's always going to be conflict. And sometimes people tend to want to bypass this consensus reality, especially when it comes to Ubuntu. They just want to take the spiritual part of it and then leave out the consensus reality. And for me personally, the consensus reality is the history we have as an African woman coming from South Africa, teaching Europeans about something that my ancestors fought so hard to preserve. It's important for me that we also, within this space, we also bring in the stories of colonization and the stories of oppressions and the appreciation of what my ancestors had to go through for me to have this knowledge and for me to be able to transmit this knowledge. So I cannot leave that out. And this is where the difficulty comes in.
Do you find that people in the European community have a hard time acknowledging the history?
Yes, I mean, in this point, as we speak today, of course, now we know that with Black Lives Matter, with what has happened, something has somehow, the towel has burst the bubble, right? That doesn't mean that it's still not difficult to speak about these things. However, it has been really difficult to touch on the subject of, excuse me.
Bless you.
Excuse me. So it does, I think that's a reaction to the
I
subject.
see. Yeah.
Releasing all the
Yeah.
trauma. You know, in my culture, to sneeze is about releasing. We encourage it. It's in Zulu we say "klita," release it. So it creates trauma. You know, when you have to talk about this uncomfortable history of colonization, of which is still, I mean, going on now in different ways, in many different ways. When you talk about oppressions, when you talk about racism, when you talk about gender issues, these are really charged topics. And usually in spiritual spaces, people want to always stick in the level of we are all one, we are all equal, we are all created the same, so we shouldn't bring these kind of topics in this space, which is really problematic because our everyday life experience, we know that we don't have the same experiences. We have class issues, we have race issues, we have all kinds, differently abled people. So we need to bring this. This is part of community. This is part of Ubuntu. This is knowing how do we find ways to treat everybody equally within the system, right? When I say community, I'm using it as a metaphor. So it's a small community where you are, or big community as in the town or the country that you are in. So it's really hard, it's trauma work, it's hard, it creates guilt, it creates resistance, it creates reactions. However, I find it that more and more it gets, I wouldn't say it gets easier, but there are more people who are rising into understanding that this is the work that needs to be done. And we need to bring both the spiritual, the Ubuntu in the essence of I am because you are. And we also need to bring the reality of things that even though I am because you are, we have somehow created a system that separates us.
That is very interesting. So the two things can exist at the same time. The spiritual truth of unity among all humans and indeed among all beings. At the same time, there are realities, historic realities and current realities, which divide us and make us sick as a community. Those two things can happen at the same time. It sounds like
Correct.
you're saying,
Yes, and they are. It's not, for me, it's not a it can, they are. It's what's happening. And we need to acknowledge that. We cannot suppress one and only just focus on one. We need to acknowledge that this is the nature of who we are. It's different levels of existence. It's not only these two, there's others as well, but it's different levels of existence. And we need to, if we really want change and we want to make radical, impactful change, we need to accept these two realities and find ways to work within these two realities because they support each other.
What are the practices that you use to try to bring these together when you're working with people?
For me, my main ingredient is love for the earth and love for humanity. And the question I always ask myself is, what kind of an ancestor do I want to be? And this is a question that drives me, what kind of an ancestor do I want to be? And holding space with dignity and love and with this being driven by this mission that I really desire to see change. And I believe that we are capable as humans, that we have this power to really, really impact change. And tapping into that indigenous knowledge of my ancestors and trusting that power, that I don't come alone. This is not it's not me holding space. It's me holding space with my ancestors behind me who carry me, who whisper in my ears. And I always say, when I come together, wherever I go, I bring my ancestors with me, and everybody, whether they are aware or not, whether they believe or not, everybody brings their ancestors together. And when we gather together, I trust in the wisdom of community. I trust in the wisdom of intention, the intention that we set together. So for me, Ubuntu becomes this basket, this safe basket, where a container of safety and love that we can, within it, we can then use all methodologies. I mean, I'm so fascinated by all kinds of mind psychology methodologies. I'm always learning, and within this pot, I cook these methodologies. And I also love ceremony. You know, ceremony for me is a way of, whichever way people choose to do ceremony, of bringing people together after we've done this hard work to find a way to ground ourselves again. So it's important for me to, what we call in the West, facilitation skills. We have all these fancy names for it, but for me, it's ceremony.
Do you feel that your connection with your ancestors is something natural, or I mean to say easy, or is it something that you have had to cultivate and work to develop?
I'm lucky enough that I am from a culture where, even though we have been influenced by religion like Christianity and other religions, that we didn't lose this ancestral connection and belief. So for me, it's not a matter of question. I've never questioned that those who passed on, their spirit is always with us, and they communicate with us in many different ways, and through our dreams, or like through signs during the day. So I was raised like that. So for me, it's something that I don't have to question, that I didn't have to. When I went through my shamanic training to be a Sangoma in South Africa, you're called a Sangoma when you get initiated. Yes, you get to learn other levels of connecting. You get to learn about herbs and other stuff. But almost everybody in my community has this understanding of your ancestors are always with you. They are in your DNA. It's something we always speak about. You know, when a baby is born, the elders will be looking at the baby and say, "Oh, look, a grandfather so and so is back." Or, "My gosh, you have," you know, you look in the mirror, you're like, I look at my feet and I think, "Oh my gosh, these are my grandmother's feet," you know. So they are with you in so many different ways. For me, it's really something I honor and cherish, that I'm lucky, and I feel lucky that I come from the culture that raised me like that, raised me to understand that there's something bigger than me, and to understand that my connection with my ancestors are always with me, no matter what.
Excuse me. Today, we look out at the world and we see a troubled place. This broadcast is called Collapse Club because we are looking at the prospect of collapse. You and I have both spent some time working with the Deep Adaptation Forum, which is about finding loving responses to collapse. I wonder how the philosophy of Ubuntu and the practices that you've talked about, what kind of response do they generate in you and the people that you work with to the prospect of this immense transformation that we're looking at in the world?
It's a scary time, no? However, I want to first just say that as an Indigenous person, Indigenous people have been experiencing collapse, different type of collapse, right? Colonization was part of collapse for the Indigenous people, for the being taken away from the land. So I think there's some kind of wisdom there, that it's not such a traumatizing situation for the Indigenous. It is at the same time a traumatizing situation because people from the global south have been experiencing this kind of climate that is happening now collapse for quite some time now, and we've been talking about it and saying, hey, hello, fellow human beings from the global north, can you pay attention to this, what's happening? So now finally we are all somehow understanding, right? Globally, we are all in the same understanding. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful in a sense that in one level, Ubuntu has taught me what we were talking about with Wendy the other day is intellectual humility. And this is something that I always speak about, because the approach is always from only the Western way of thinking, scientific, Western scientists. And sometimes I worry that the Western way of thinking, not that it is necessary, but it doesn't always work, right? Because sometimes I feel we want to create solutions with the same energy, the very energy that created the problems in the first place. And I understand, because it feels like we don't have time, right? We need to hurry up. So we need to do things and hurry up. And it might sound radical when you come in and say, actually, we need to slow down. We need to stop and listen to what's happening and trust in the process, right? And look at what has happened with COVID. It has forced us to actually stop and slow down. It was no choice. We had to stop and slow down. And I feel like we're going through a process of learning, of really relearning on how do we want to live in our homes, in our communities. It's forcing us to do that. So maybe the collapse is good, because it's forcing us to slow down. And as painful as it is, it's forcing us to go back into understanding what is really important. Why are we here? What does it mean being human? What does it mean walking this earth? When you walk this earth, Mother Earth, who gives us so much, what does that mean? To go deeper into the understanding of every step you take and you're walking on this beautiful earth. What does that mean? You know, how does that, yeah, what kind of an ancestor do you want to be? This earth that doesn't need us. We need it so much, and it will still go on without us. So it's humbling at the same time. And somehow there's a part of me that feels like we have as humans, we've drifted so far away from what's real that the collapse might be just what needs to happen for us to go back into the center. However, I don't know what's coming, right? I don't know what's coming. There are predictions and we see things are happening, but how it's going to end, I don't know. And I feel like with my small, humble brain, I really don't want to know so much about what's really coming. I just want to do what I can with the communities that I can do it with. And that's centering myself into love, into living with the earth again, into unlearning so many things. Myself, I need intellectual humility because I was raised in a very Western way of thinking. So I don't know what's coming. All I know is I can find spaces where I can connect with people and share that love and share that wisdom and learn from them. And together we can find a way to really reconnect. I feel humbled as I'm talking about this. So I would like to have a moment. I feel so small. Like the more I talked about the earth, Mother Earth, I'm just having this vision, like I'm shrinking and shrinking and realizing, gosh, we are so tiny in this whole spectrum of the universe. And yet we would like to think of ourselves as this huge, impactful beings that know everything, and we actually don't. We don't. So for me, if anything, collapse is a gift that can remind us of humbleness and community and living with the earth and caring for each other and doing the best that we can with what we have, because we don't know, we really don't know what's really, really coming.
You've mentioned a couple of times the particular perspective that Indigenous people have. There is a huge gap, it seems like, to me, an immense separation between people who are enmeshed in the Western colonial cultures and the people who have been colonized and oppressed for hundreds of years. There's a huge gap of outlook and of understanding and feeling, I think. How, and this will be the last thing I'll ask you today. How are we to bridge that gap? What truths do we need to explore in order to heal that horrible wound?
Yeah, I think what touches me is that it's a horrible wound, right? And that it has created a gap. I strongly, for me, it's just all the things that I've mentioned already, in a sense of, in the essence level, remembering the essence level, right? What I call Ubuntu, that our humanity. And from this place, being able to sit in the fire, not around. You see, this picture of sitting around the fire is a picture of beautiful storytelling time, but sitting on the fire is the tough, right? Tough space. However, if the container is there, we are able to look at each other from that human perspective and tell our stories and listen and listen and listen and be open to unlearning, being open to healing, being open to understanding what was done to us and why was it done to us. So therefore, we also do need the Western way of thinking and analyzing. It's also useful, right? We need to understand our history. Why are we where we are today? How did we get here and why? So we do need to bring in the understandings of capitalism, colonialism, our history. We do need to understand what happened in Europe between the Europeans before they went to colonize. You know, I always say this, it's like the understanding of that trauma. So this goes through storytelling, creating safe spaces, safe enough spaces to tell stories, to heal our wounds, to share with each other, to agree to disagree, to fight with each other within the space that is properly facilitated, because we are going to disagree. So for me is, let's actively create those spaces, actively approach each other with an open heart and with curiosity. And if you are in pain, let's learn to say, I'm listening, I'm hearing you. However, what you're saying to me, it hurts. It really hurts a lot. And it's traumatizing. And let's find a space where we can find a way to transform this pain and the hurts. Let's find help and support from our community, how we can transform this pain. I don't know, I have so much hope for humanity. I believe we are amazing. I think we are just so amazing, and we are full of beautiful knowledge. And we can bridge the Indigenous and the Western way. We can find a way to meet each other, because we are humans. We are humans. We are abantu, ubuntu. So we can. It's possible. We can do it. It requires work. It's not easy work, but it's doable. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered your question. I'm having a lot of pictures in my head.
Sure. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done, person to person. And of course, the crimes of history will not be solved or absolved in a day or a single conversation. But you point to what I think has to be the central matter of healing. The culture that I'm a part of, that I was brought up in, it turns out is based on diabolic crimes that have been committed against the earth and against the earth's people. This is the beginning, I think, of a much larger conversation, which perhaps we will not have today, but maybe we can have it again and get into it a little more. It's been wonderful to talk to you, Nonty. The time has just flown by. Is there anything you would like to say to conclude?
Yeah, I want to say thank you for inviting me. And yeah, as you say, this is a kind of conversation that can, yeah, we can have part 2, part 3, part 4. I love this sharing spaces, because we can also invite other people, because it's good to always hear from other people as well, how they experience the collapse and what's going on in their communities, and how are they dealing with this healing, this bridging between the Indigenous and the Western way of thinking, reparations, coming together. So I think it's really important that we hear from each other and share the knowledge that we have, and just keep talking. We shouldn't stop talking. Let's keep talking and talking, and do as well. Do and talk. But let's just keep coming together, creating heart spaces that are necessary, so we can act in a very meaningful, loving, impactful way to create radical change. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. To
Thank you.
Our viewers, I say thank you for watching. This is Nonty Sedibe, Nonty. And I'm David Baum. This is Collapse Club. Until we meet again, farewell.